Black SUVs with no plates crept into our little town like they owned the place, tires whispering through dead October leaves. I was in my shed, finishing up a rebuild on an old outboard, and for a moment I honestly figured they were lost tourists, or some big shot from the city looking for a weekend hunt. Then they torched the only dock we had. Flames bit into tarred planks like a starving animal, throwing orange light across the lead-gray lake and the black spines of spruce on the far shore. And the men who lit the match did it with the kind of confidence you only get when you're sure nobody's coming to stop you, when you're sure that in 2 weeks not a single living soul will still be here. Our town chairman, Walter Hensley, stepped forward to talk them down. He was nearly 80, but he stood straight, shoulders squared the way men do when they've never learned to bow. The leader didn't answer him. He just drove a boot into Walter's chest. Walter folded, grabbed for breath, and dropped to his knees. The men laughed at the sound he made, not knowing one detail that mattered. At the edge of town, right where the ground gave way to water, there was a log house with its own little pier. And in that house lived a man who'd buried his past 10 years earlier, in the cold black gut of the Norwegian Sea. A man who'd once served with a Navy SEAL dive team, so quiet and so lethal, their missions never made the news. Missions that officially never happened. Back then, even pirates off the Horn of Africa had a name for him. A call sign they muttered like a curse. The drowned man. And now the drowned man was awake. The people who brought fire into his quiet cove were about to learn something the hard way. Some men don't sink. They just come back up different. Before we go on, take a second to subscribe and tell us where you're listening from. Drop your city, your town, hell, even your crossroads in the comments. I want to know how far these words travel. My name is Ethan Sawyer. I'm 37. For the last 7 years, I've lived in a place called Stone Creek, way up north, far from anything that makes the news. It's a smear of houses on the rocky bank of a huge cold lake, close enough to the Canadian line that you feel the border less in checkpoints and more in the way the air goes thin and quiet, like the world is holding its breath. Stone Creek is 27 homes sunk into stone and pine roots, maybe 60 people if you count the kids. Mostly old-timers, families that have pulled fish out of these waters for generations. A few outsiders too, folks like me who ran from city noise and found a kind of peace that feels almost unreal. My work is simple. I'm the guy people bring their boats to. I rebuild outboards, patch holes in old aluminum hulls, replace rotted boards, help set nets and check them. I don't make much cash. Most of the time I get paid in food. Fresh fish, smoked venison, mushrooms, berries. It's enough. I live alone in a small log place I bought for next to nothing from the widow of an old game warden. It sits apart from the rest, right on the water, with a little private dock. 2 windows face the lake. 2 face a pine stand older than anyone in town. Nothing extra, nothing loud. Around here, people know me as Ethan. Quiet, sober, the kind of man who'll show up with a wrench if you ask, but won't pry into your life. Up north, that matters. Everybody's got a story, and nobody digs at scars unless you invite them to. No one asks about the long mark across my back, white and jagged, like something with teeth tried to take a piece out of me. No one asks why. Some nights I walk down to the dock and stand there for hours staring into the black water, even when the cold is sharp enough to split bone. They took me in. They gave me a roof in the quiet I'd been chasing. But the past doesn't let go. It lives inside you like shrapnel you never got removed. Every night it's the same dream. Slick black water off Somalia, the stink of cordite and salt and burning diesel, my teammates screaming through radio static, short bursts of gunfire, dull underwater concussions you feel more than hear. Operations that never existed on paper. Orders spoken low in the red light of a ship's cabin. Men I dragged under, feeling their fight fade as their last air turned into a trail of bubbles. I wake up around 4. My heart slams my ribs like a loose piston in a dying engine. My hands reach for a combat knife on my belt that hasn't been there in years. I get up, throw on a jacket, and walk out to my dock. The wind off the lake cuts through the fog in my head, reminds me I'm alive, reminds me that war ended 10 years ago, reminds me I'm not that man anymore. I stand there an hour, sometimes 2, until my breathing evens out. 7 years of that. 7 years trying to forget what was burned into me with a hot iron. 10 years ago, I served with a Special Operations Maritime Unit, one of the teams people call myths because it's easier that way. We were the kind of divers who could hit a target anywhere in the world's oceans and disappear like we'd never been. Our job was the kind you don't hear about on TV. Reconnaissance, sabotage, ship takedowns, high-value removals. We were ghosts in deep water. There were 10 of us. Our commander was Commander Marcus Kane, 45, granite in human skin, a man who'd walked through enough wars to stop believing in luck. We had 2 marksmen, 2 demolition guys, a medic, a comms specialist, and 4 recon divers, me included. My call sign was the Drowned Man. I earned it after a job in the South China Sea, solo infiltration, a secured naval facility, 2 patrol boats sent to the bottom, and me slipping back out through underwater barriers without anyone ever seeing so much as a ripple. The enemy never figured out how it happened, like the sea itself had come for them. In 6 years, we ran more than 40 classified missions, each one balanced on the edge of what a human body can do. We lost 2 men, one to a storm during a submarine insertion, one to a sniper's round during a platform seizure. I'd been hit 4 times myself, 2 fragments, 1 bullet, 1 blade when a fight turned into a knife match in a ship's narrow corridor. But I always went back. The team was my life. They were my family. Brothers bonded not by blood, but by salt water and shared secrets. Then October 2013 came, and everything collapsed. Off the Horn of Africa, we got orders to take a cargo ship intelligence said was hauling a heavy load of shoulder-fired missiles to a local terrorist network. The operation was clean on paper. We had the route, the deck plan, the number of armed guards, their weapons. We launched at night in a driving rain. 2 rigid hull inflatables cutting the sea. 10 men geared up, running closed-circuit rebreathers. No bubbles, no noise. Nothing that would give us away. We approached submerged, climbed the hull in silence. Everything was on schedule. It was a trap. They were waiting. Someone inside our pipeline sold us out. The second our boots hit deck, machine guns opened up from both sides. Floodlights knifed through the rain, blinding white. The firefight was short and savage. We fought like wolves with our backs to a cliff, but the numbers weren't even. My brothers dropped one after another. Commander Kane went down first, covering my retreat. His last words cracked through my headset. "Drowned man, live." I watched them die. I heard them die. And there was nothing I could do. A round caught my shoulder, another tore into my leg. I hit the deck behind a winch. When the last magazine went dry, I did the only thing left. I went where I was strongest. Over the rail, down into warm water turned thick with blood. They raked the surface with gunfire, but I was already deep, slipping into blackness, leaving behind only a dark red wake. For 3 days, I made it toward neutral waters, hiding from patrol boats, eating whatever I could catch. On the 3rd day, a tanker picked me up half dead. 2 months in a military hospital. The wounds closed. Inside, everything stayed burned hollow. When I got back to the base, an admiral called me in. He watched me for a long time without speaking, then told me the mission had failed and the entire team was dead. Officially, we'd all drowned during training due to an equipment malfunction. They never found the traitor. They offered me leave, then a training billet. I couldn't do it. I couldn't look at young operators and pretend I didn't know how easy it is to get sold out and left to die 1,000 miles from home. I put in my paperwork. A month later, I was medically discharged, and my old life got erased like it had never existed. I ran north, far from the ocean, far from war, far from memory. 7 years ago, I found Stone Creek. I bought a house, a boat, and became Ethan the boat mechanic. I buried the drowned man in the bottom of my mind and swore I'd never touch a weapon again. That oath held for 7 years, right up until today. I stood in the shadow of my shed and watched 8 men with close-cropped hair and matching black gear spill out of the SUVs. Hard faces, efficient movements, not street trash, ex-cops, contractors, the kind of men who'd been trained and then turned loose. One of them, tall with a face like it had been carved from rock, walked straight up to Walter Hensley as Walter stepped out to meet them. "What do you want here, gentlemen?" Walter asked calmly, though I could see tension tightening his shoulders. The leader smiled. "We want this land, old man. All of it. Your whole little town. You've got 2 weeks to pack up and disappear." "This is our land," Walter said, voice steady. "Our fathers lived here. Our grandfathers. We're not going anywhere. You're the ones who should leave." The smile slid off the man's face. He moved his boot like it was nothing. Walter crumpled, clutching his chest. People poured out of houses, shouting. Two of the men walked down to the dock where a dozen boats were tied up. They pulled out jerry cans and started splashing fuel across the boards. One spark and it went up. Fire surged toward the low northern sky, devouring work that had taken generations. The smell, burning wood and gasoline, hit me like a fist, and something inside me clicked. A switch I'd kept taped down for years snapped free. The men got back in their vehicles and rolled out as slowly as they'd come. They left behind crying women, stunned men, Walter coughing on the ground, and a roaring bonfire on the shore of the lake. I clenched my fists until my nails bit my palms. 7 years building a quiet life. 7 years being Ethan the boat guy. They shattered it in 10 minutes. They woke the thing I'd buried. I killed the lights in the shed, walked into the house, locked the door, and stood at the window, watching the dock burn down into glowing ribs and ash. Watching the lake lie there cold and black. 30 meters below the surface, in a small underwater grotto I'd found my first year here, there was a watertight case. Inside it was everything left from my old life. Everything the drowned man would need to remind these men of the truth. Water doesn't just give life, it can take it too, quietly, inevitably, and for good. The time had come. It was time for the drowned man to wake up. Night fell over Stone Creek fast, like someone threw a wet canvas over the lake and the forest. The rain that started after the mercenaries left turned into a thin, biting sleet. People went home. The only light still on was in Walter's place, where a few old men sat in shock, trying to decide what you do when the law is 100 miles down a broken road and the people threatening you don't look afraid of consequences. Everyone understood the same thing. Men like that don't show up without backing. They moved like they had protection, like nothing could touch them. I didn't go in. Words wouldn't do anything now. Action would. I waited until the last light in town went out. Then I pulled on an old wetsuit, one that had seen better days, the only thin thread connecting my current life to the last one. It wasn't built for long in October water, but I didn't need long. 30 minutes maybe. I took a powerful dive light and a knife I kept in the pocket of my work jacket out of habit I'd never managed to kill. I slipped out and walked down to the shore. The lake breathed cold, 5, maybe 6 degrees Celsius, cold enough to kill an untrained man in minutes. But my body remembered. It remembered drills in the Barrens, instructors making us sit in ice water until the shock stopped owning us. I took a few deep breaths, filled my blood with oxygen, and slid in. The lake clamped my chest in a vise, but I ignored the reflex and forced my breathing smooth. I clicked the light on. Its beam cut through perfectly clear black water. Near the shore, the bottom was strewn with smooth boulders, slick with weed. I kicked out, working only my fins, arms tight along my sides to conserve heat and energy. My target was half a mile from town, at the base of a steep rock face locals called Bear's Brow. I knew it like my own hands. I'd dived there dozens of times hunting burbo. At 30 meters, the rock split in a narrow crack that opened into a small grotto. A perfect place to hide a past. The descent took only minutes. Pressure built in my ears. Cold slid under my suit like a living thing. I didn't fight it. My body ran on muscle memory and my mind went razor clear. There, the crack. I squeezed into it, and my dive light opened up a pocket of space no bigger than my bedroom. The air trapped inside was stale, but it was enough to break the surface and take a breath. And there it was, in the far corner, chained to a titanium spike driven into the stone, lay my watertight case, military grade, ocean-proof, built to take pressure at depth and stay sealed. I popped the carabiner, and the case, slightly buoyant, started to drift upward. Getting it to the surface was mechanics, not luck. 40 minutes later, I was back in my shed. I locked the door, pulled a curtain over the window, and lit the little pot-belly stove. My teeth chattered from the cold, but that was just the body doing what bodies do. Inside, something colder than fire was burning. I opened the case. The smell hit me first. Gun oil and neoprene, like a door swinging open onto a room full of ghosts. Those things had waited 10 years for their hour. On top lay my old combat dive suit, matte black, thick neoprene, reinforced at knees and elbows, fitted like a second skin. Under it, a closed-circuit rebreather, silent, bubbleless, built for work that couldn't leave a trace on the surface. Then the rest of the kit, load-bearing harness, weight belt, depth gauge, compass, a low-glare mask, composite fins that could drive you hard without draining you dry, and finally, tools that weren't meant for fixing boats. My closest companion, a SEAL-style combat knife, salt-proof steel, sharp enough to slice rope or punch through inflatable hull. The grip was textured so it wouldn't slip even in a wet hand. Beside it sat an underwater rifle, the kind that spat long, needle-like darts built to fly straight through water where normal rounds would tumble. And at the bottom, wrapped like a last confession, were 4 magnetic charges, small, brutal things meant to tear through a boat's belly or cripple an engine with one clean blast. In a sealed tube under everything else, I found what I'd hidden for the day I prayed would never come. An old-school sat phone, the kind that didn't show up on the usual nets, and a flash drive. On it was proof from our last op, names, accounts, routes, data I'd pulled off a boat's computer before we destroyed it. Enough to ruin people who didn't like being ruined. I laid it all out on the floor. It wasn't Ethan Sawyer's toolbox. It was the drowned man's arsenal, the gear of a ghost. I changed into dry clothes and warmed up by the stove. There was no time to hesitate. Those men had to be camped nearby, probably off an old logging road. 2 weeks was what they'd said, but men like that didn't wait if they didn't have to. I needed numbers, weapons, routine, weak points. I pulled on a black camouflage suit and a balaclava, grabbed night vision binoculars and my knife. I left the underwater rifle behind, for now. Tonight was for eyes and ears, not gunfire. I slipped out of the shed as quietly as I'd entered. The rain had almost died, and low clouds swallowed the moon and stars whole. Perfect conditions for a recon run. I didn't take the road. I cut through the woods along the lakeshore, moving through moss and fallen needles, knowing every dip and deer trail like a map under my feet. An hour later, I found them. Their camp was exactly where I'd expected, 3 miles out on a broad clearing near the old road. 2 SUVs, a fire, 4 men around it, 2 more walking perimeter, an army surplus tent set back in the dark. 8 total, the same crew from town, armed with AK pattern rifles and sidearms. Serious but not impossible. I settled into brush on a small rise about 200 yards out. Through the night vision glass, the darkness turned into a sickly green day, and I watched. They were loose, laughing too loud, passing a flask, talking like the forest was just scenery. The sentries walked the same route again and again, barely bothering to peer into the dark. City-trained men. In the woods they were half blind. I stayed still for 3 hours learning them. Guard rotation every 2 hours. 2 in the tent, 2 out. Someone always at the fire. A generator chugging off to the side to feed a floodlight. Their eyes and ears. And their softest spot. A plan formed in my head. Simple and efficient, like a blade under the ribs. No killing. Not yet. Right now, I needed them afraid. I needed them to understand they weren't the apex predator out here. The forest had been watching them, and the lake had its own guardian spirit, and he wasn't pleased. I waited for the next shift change. One of the fresh sentries drifted toward the edge of the clearing to take a leak. The other stayed by the fire. That was my window. I slid down the hill like a snake. Not a twig cracked. I circled wide behind them, coming in from the generator side, close enough to throw. A small rock from my pocket. Quick calculation. 1 toss. It pinged off the metal of an SUV. Quiet, but in that night it rang like a gunshot. The sentry by the fire jerked and snapped his rifle up. "Who's there?" he barked. His buddy turned too, fumbling with his belt. Both stared into the darkness in the direction the rock had come from. The wrong direction. I moved. 2 fast bursts of motion, and I was at the SUVs. Knife out. 1 clean slice across all 4 tires of the first vehicle. The hiss of air was nearly swallowed by the generator's rattle. Then the second SUV, same treatment, 8 cuts, under 10 seconds. Now the message. I crept to the tent. The flap was half open. 4 men slept inside on cots. I didn't touch them. On a folding table beside a radio sat a tablet, probably the boss's. I laid a wet strand of lakeweed across the screen, dripping and stinking of silt. A small sign, but it would read loud. The drowned man. I slipped away as silently as I'd come. 5 minutes later, I was back on my rise watching. The sentries found nothing, laughed off their nerves, and went back to the fire. They still didn't know. Morning would teach them. I stayed until dawn. Then when the first pale light pushed through the trees, I left, dissolving into the fog. I didn't feel tired, only that cold, ringing emptiness I'd almost forgotten, the calm that comes right before the fight. I returned to Stone Creek as people started waking up. This was only the beginning. They'd come back angry. They'd bring help. But now I was ready. In my shed, the ghost's arsenal waited. And in the woods and the lake, the drowned man waited too. And he wasn't hiding anymore. By the time a dull gray dawn crawled over the water, the town was quiet again. An uneasy quiet, the kind that comes before a storm breaks. I peeled off the wetsuit, hid the gear, and felt my skin burn from cold and strain. My head stayed sharp, ice sharp. No fear, no rage, just the predator's steady calm. I brewed strong tea and sat by the window, staring at the lake. My little night visit had been a stone tossed into still water. Now the ripples would spread, and those ripples would turn into a wave. During the day, I worked like I always did, keeping the mask on. An older neighbor, Hank Miller, asked me to look at an outboard that had been coughing and dying for weeks. I dug through greasy parts while he complained, in the way men do when they're scared and trying to sound normal. The whole town buzzed with it. People whispered in driveways, faces tight, asking the same question. Do we pack up and abandon the houses we were born in, or do we stay and wait for whatever comes next? Walter, sore in the chest but stubborn as iron, made his rounds telling folks not to panic, to stick together. He came to my place too. His eyes, usually bright, almost mischievous, were full of worry. What do you think, Ethan? He asked, sitting on the edge of my boat. I think leaving is a mistake, I said without looking up. Give men like that a finger and they'll take your whole arm. And what do we do? He asked, voice low. You can't fight power. They've got guns. They've got people behind them. Maybe the woods have power too, I said. And the lake. They're the strangers here. We're home. Walter held my gaze a long time, like he was trying to read the part I wasn't saying out loud. He was an old man, and old men see more than they should. You're right, he said finally. We're home. We hold. To the end. He left, and I stayed with my thoughts. I'd seen fear in his eyes, but I'd also seen that northern kind of resolve. The kind that doesn't bend, even when it should. These people wouldn't surrender, and neither would I. Near noon, I heard an engine growl. One of the mercenaries' SUVs crawled down the road toward the nearest county seat, limping on 3 slashed tires and a spare. 2 men inside, good, they'd split their strength, which meant 6 were still in camp. My plan had worked better than I'd hoped. They weren't just inconvenienced, they were forced to weaken themselves to fix it. Idiots. I finished Hank's motor and told him I was heading into the woods to check a few snares. No one questioned it. I disappeared into the trees all the time. It was perfect cover. I pulled on my camo again, but this time I packed heavier. Into my tactical bag went the underwater rifle, 4 magazines, a spool of thin but strong line, a few smoke canisters, and my knife. Today wasn't just about fear. Today I was going to cut their lifeline to the outside world and make them feel what it's like to be prey in someone else's forest. I approached their camp from another angle, moving on animal trails. They were angry and jumpy. Their leader, the rock face, that's what I called him in my head, was chewing his men out, pointing at the slashed tires, cursing them for being careless. They blamed it on locals and drunks. Not one of them even considered the possibility that it had been deliberate. They still believed they were in control. I crawled back into the same spot on the hill and waited. I needed night. The day dragged like a sentence. I lay in wet leaves without moving, watching them patch tires, curse each other out, and drink to burn the edge off their nerves. Predictable men, playing at being hunters. When dusk fell, they lit the fire again and posted guards. But this time they were cautious. The sentries walked in pairs, heads turning more often, eyes trying harder. Good. Let them be afraid. Fear makes people sloppy. Fear makes them hear things that aren't there and miss the things that are. My target was the main tent. That's where their radio would be. And if I was reading them right, their satellite phone too. Cut their comms and they'd be isolated. No backup, no updates, no way to report trouble. Just a vacuum, just the hostile woods. Just whatever unseen thing had decided they didn't belong. The plan was risky. I'd have to get close enough to smell them. But there wasn't another path. I chose the lakeside. Longer route, safer approach. People expect danger from land, from the road, from the tree line. Water feels like a natural wall, especially water this cold. I stripped down to thermal layers, pulled on my wetsuit, fins, mask, and the rebreather. The underwater rifle rode on my back, but I took only the knife in my hand. A mile away from their camp, I eased into the lake and started swimming just under the surface, guided by compass and the shape of the bottom. Water was my ally, my element. It hid me, swallowed sound, kept my secrets. Half an hour later, I was there. I raised my head slowly behind thick reeds at the shoreline. The camp sat about 150 yards inland. Their fire burned bright. 2 sentries passed in front of it, their bodies cut into sharp silhouettes against the flames. I waited until they disappeared behind the tent, then slid out of the lake without a sound. A black figure made of night and water, streaming in rivulets. I took off the fins and rebreather and buried them in the reeds. Then I moved low and slow, hugging the ground, using every shadow, every bush. The cold weight of the rifle pressed between my shoulder blades. The knife felt light, honest, and familiar. 10 minutes later, I reached the backside of the main tent. Dark, unlit, safe from the fire's glow. Voices drifted through the canvas. Cards, laughter. The lazy confidence of men who think nothing can touch them. I made a small slit near the ground so I could see. Inside sat 4 of them. Their leader, Rockface, and 3 others. On the folding table, exactly where I expected, was a field radio. Beside it lay a satellite phone. My targets. I waited. I needed the moment when their attention fractured. It came when one of them lost a hand and cursed loud enough to drown out the generator. I widened the slit and slipped inside. The tent stank of cheap tobacco, alcohol, and unwashed bodies. I froze behind a stack of crates, becoming a shadow. They were sitting with their backs to me, locked into the game. I moved fast, precise. One silent step to the table, the sat phone in my hand, knife out. One clean cut through the wires feeding the radio's power unit. Dead. The phone went into the waterproof pouch at my belt. The radio was useless. The job was done. Now I just had to leave. I drifted toward the flap as quietly as I'd entered, and that's when the youngest of them stood up. "I'm going to take a leak," he said, pushing away from the table. He walked straight at me. There was no time to hide. He stepped out of the tent and collided with me face to face. His eyes blew wide. He didn't see a man. He saw something black and dripping that shouldn't exist. Something the lake coughed up from nightmares. His mouth opened to scream. The scream never came. My left hand clamped over his mouth. My right brought the knife to his throat. Cold steel-kissed skin. I felt his heart hammering like it wanted out of his chest. I felt his whole body shake. "Shh," I breathed into his ear, so quiet it was softer than needles falling from a pine. One sound, one twitch, and you're done. He went rigid, swallowing air through his nose like a drowning man. I wasn't going to kill him. A terrified witness was worth more than a corpse. A corpse tells no stories. This kid would. He'd talk about the wet horror that came out of the dark. I eased him backward into shadow, away from the firelight. He didn't fight. Fear had him pinned like a nail. When the darkness swallowed us completely, I shoved him hard to the ground. He hit the dirt, and I vanished. I heard him lying there, whimpering, trying to understand what had just happened. A minute later, he scrambled up and ran, stumbling toward the fire. "There!" he gasped, pointing into the trees. "Black! Wet! With a knife. The others jumped up, rifles snapping into their hands. What? Rockface barked. Who? A demon out of the water. He was right here. Rockface strode up and slapped him hard across the face. You're drunk, he snarled. Demons. Go sleep it off. They didn't believe him. They decided he'd been drinking or losing his mind. That was even better. Fear was good. Doubt was better. Now they'd start watching each other sideways. I made my way back to the shoreline, pulled on my gear, and slid under the surface, taking with me their only thread back to civilization. The camp lights stayed on for a long time. They searched the perimeter, of course. They found nothing. The kid sat by the fire with his head in his hands, mumbling about a water devil. The first blood had been spilled, not the kind that stains hands, the kind that runs through nerves, the blood of their confidence. Later, I lay in my house listening to rain and turned the stolen satellite phone over in my hands. A few numbers were stored inside. One was labeled Boss. Soon they'd notice the sabotage and the missing phone. And then Boss would send someone else, someone who wasn't a sloppy bully with a gun. Real hunters. Hunters who would come for me. Fine. Let them come. I was waiting. The drowned man had returned to his element, and he was ready for war. For the next 2 days, the forest held an unusual silence. Not the quiet I knew, not the calm of distance and snow and water, but a tight electric hush, like a wire pulled to snapping. The mercenaries didn't show their faces in Stone Creek. They stayed in their camp like animals that had caught a scent they couldn't explain. I knew they were scared and disoriented. My night work had done its job. They'd lost mobility, communications, and, most important, certainty. The kid who'd run into me had told his story, I was sure. Even if they laughed it off, the seed had been planted. The woods stopped being just woods to them. It became something alive, something hostile, something that watched from the dark. I didn't sit idle. By day, I kept wearing Ethan's skin. I helped the men in town drag the charred bones of our dock out of the lake. We hauled blackened logs and bent spikes, and every swing of an axe, every nail pulled free, was quiet defiance. We weren't leaving. We were rebuilding. By night, I went back into the forest. The drowned man took what was his. I didn't go near their camp anymore. Instead, I turned the woods around it into one giant snare. Nothing lethal. That wasn't the point. I wanted their minds. I strung thin line across the trails at ankle height and tied empty cans to it. Cans stuffed with stones. Crude but effective. A perfect way to steal sleep. Every night when their sentries made their rounds, they tripped the lines with a clatter that sounded like the world falling apart. The whole camp would explode awake, weapons up, eyes wild, only to find nothing but darkness and silence. After a few nights of that, their nerves were shredded. They stopped sleeping. They flinched at every twig snap. From a distance, I watched their faces change, hollowing out with fatigue, tightening with that trapped animal look. I left more signs, too. Bundles of lakeweed, placed where they couldn't miss them. The same wet, reeking strands I'd left on Rockface's tablet. Those quiet messages scared them more than threats, because they didn't understand the enemy. They didn't know what he looked like, where he came from, where he vanished to. To them, I wasn't a man. I was the spirit of the place, and it worked. On the third morning after my second visit, they broke. I watched them tear down camp in a hurry, load what they could into the repaired SUV, and abandon the first vehicle on its slashed tires. Then they drove toward the county seat. Stone Creek exhaled. The old folks decided we'd won, that the thugs had gotten spooked and wouldn't come back. Walter even mentioned we should celebrate that night, but I knew better. This wasn't the end. It was a pause. They didn't leave because they surrendered. They left to bring reinforcements. The company behind them, Northridge Resources, wasn't the kind that backed off after one setback. They would send different men next time. Professionals who didn't believe in forest spirits and didn't laugh at lake demons. People who knew how to track and kill. People like me. I didn't have much time, and I used every second. I moved my arsenal from the shed down into the underwater grotto. The house wasn't safe anymore. The grotto was my den, my fortress. I expanded the space, made a place to rest, stocked food and fresh water. I could stay down there for weeks if I had to. Then I went through the satellite phone carefully. Only 5 contacts: boss, dispatch, legal, gray, accounting. Calling any of them would be suicide. They'd trace me fast. But the phone itself was a source, a key. I opened it up. Under the battery, I found what I'd hoped for: the SIM card. I contacted the only person I could trust, the only person who knew I was still alive. My old commander, Marcus Kane. I'd watched him die on that ship, or I thought I had, but 6 months ago he'd found me. Turns out he'd been pulled out barely breathing, discharged the way I was, and folded into a quiet security job with the kind of reach and contacts you don't advertise. I sent him an encrypted message from a burner phone, asked him to run the SIM. His answer came hours later. Registered to Granite Shield Security, dirty outfit, ex-special operations types. They're being run through a contractor named Andrew Harlan. Call sign, Harrow. Be careful, Ethan. Harrow's an animal. We crossed paths years ago. Different pipeline. No principles. No mercy. A true merc. My heart missed a beat. Harrow. I knew the name. I'd never met him face to face, but I'd heard stories. He'd come up in a parallel unit in another theater. Brilliant, vicious, and eventually cut loose for excessive force and cruelty that couldn't be hidden. After that, he'd gone freelance and built a pack of men like him. Men who didn't flinch. If Boss was sending Harrow, the stakes had changed. This wasn't intimidation anymore. This was a cleanup. And suddenly I understood something with absolute clarity. I was almost out of time. I had to get the town ready to defend itself. But how could I do that without ripping my cover wide open? I couldn't walk up to Walter and say, "Listen, I'm a former combat diver, and soon a team of professional mercs is coming to kill us, so let's start digging fighting positions." They'd think I'd finally gone crazy. It had to be subtler than that. I went to Walter. "They'll be back," I told him bluntly, "and next time there'll be more of them, and they'll be meaner." He sighed like the words confirmed something his bones already knew. "I think so too, Ethan. I can't shake the feeling. We need to prepare. Get the men together. Hunters, fishermen, anybody who can handle a gun. You think it'll come to shooting? I think we need to be ready for anything." I didn't mention Harrow. I only said I had a bad feeling. Up here, people respect bad feelings. They've survived on them. That night we gathered the men at Walter's house, 7 of them. With me and Walter, 9 total. A handful against a professional crew. But these were hard men, wind-burned and stubborn, who knew the woods like their own hands. Every one of them had a hunting rifle and the kind of patience you can't teach in a classroom. I gave them a simple plan. Round-the-clock watches on the approaches and an alarm system, 3 strikes on the old church bell. I showed them how to set up basic observation points and how to blend into the land. I didn't teach them to fight. I taught them to see and hear. Everything else, I intended to carry myself. They agreed. I saw anxiety in their eyes, but I saw something else too. The quiet decision to defend their homes. It was in their blood. For 2 days we worked. We placed posts along the only road and the main forest trails. I ran field phone cable between them. Stuff I'd borrowed from an abandoned storage shed out past the last cabin. Now we had a line. Now we had warning. Stone Creek turned into a bristling hedgehog, just in time. On the evening of the 2nd day, the lookout on the road called in through the field phone. Voice tight. "Ethan, they're coming. 3 covered trucks and an armored vehicle up front. A lot of them. They're here." An armored vehicle wasn't a private security flex anymore. It was war. Harrow had come to do this for real. I gave the only order that mattered. "Everyone to your posts. Nobody fires unless I say so. That's the rule. Watch." I pulled on my combat dive suit. The gear was ready. The underwater rifle, the knife, the charges. I stepped out of my house and slid into the black, icy water. This was my home now. The convoy stopped where the first group had camped, about 3 miles out. More than 30 men poured out, all in matching camouflage, body armor, helmets fitted with night vision gear. They moved in a tight, practiced rhythm. Wolves. And there was a wolf at their head. The armored vehicle's door opened, and a tall, lean man in his 40s stepped out. Even at a distance, You could feel the threat rolling off him like heat. Harrow. He didn't bother building a camp. He lined his men up and started issuing orders. From my position across the lake, I watched through high-powered glass. He split the unit into 4 teams of 5. 3 teams melted into the woods, moving to wrap Stone Creek from 3 sides. The 4th, Harrow's team, stayed by the vehicles. They weren't waiting for daylight. They were going to surround the town and hit it at night. I understood his plan instantly. Cut off retreat routes, then a fast, brutal sweep. He didn't know who he was dealing with. He thought his enemy was a few locals with deer rifles. He was hunting on land, and I was in the water. I went under and swam. My target wasn't his men, it was his machines. Take away mobility. First rule of sabotage. Without vehicles, they'd be trapped. Forced to move on foot through woods I'd already turned into my personal hunting ground, I approached their staging area submerged, surfaced at the shoreline under hanging spruce boughs. Harrow and his people were 100 yards away beside the armored vehicle, a map spread out between them. I pulled 4 magnetic charges from my pack, each one palm-sized, each one packed with enough bite to change the shape of a knight. Back under. I swam to the old wooden bridge over the creek, the only route heavy vehicles could use to reach town. I fixed 2 charges to the central supports and set their timers for 30 minutes, enough time for the convoy to roll. Then I returned to the vehicles. 2 covered trucks sat side by side. I slipped beneath them and set 1 charge on each fuel tank. No timer. Those would need remote detonation. Now the hardest one. The armored vehicle sat in the open. Getting close unseen was nearly impossible, until I spotted a detail, a shallow drainage ditch, grown over with grass, running from the vehicle toward the creek. My chance. I crawled through that ditch, sinking into cold mud, keeping low until the armored belly was above me. I didn't place the charge on the fuel tank. I placed it on the engine housing. It wouldn't destroy the vehicle, but it would cripple it. I backed out the way I came and slipped into the water again. Now there was only waiting. I settled into my observation point, a small detonator clutched in my hand. In 20 minutes, the teams in the woods would be in position. Harrow would start the move, and then I'd press the button. My nerves were drawn tight. This wasn't a scare tactic anymore. This was an act of war, and once I did it, there would be no turning back. They would hunt me, and it would end only when one of us stopped breathing. I looked at Stone Creek. A few dim lights still burned in houses along the shore. People were counting on me, whether they knew it or not. I couldn't fail them. I was their only hope, their lake ghost. Night went still. Even the nocturnal birds shut up, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. Through the optic, I watched Harrow give a last order into his radio. His team slipped into motion, 3 predatory shadows disappearing into the dark to take the town from flanks and rear. Harrow and his 4 climbed into the armored vehicle. The diesel engine growled to life, ugly and loud in the quiet. The convoy rolled. Armored vehicle first, then the 2 trucks. They crawled toward the old bridge, the only path for heavy wheels. I waited until the armored vehicle reached the bridge's midpoint. My heartbeat stayed steady, counting seconds. My fingers didn't shake. This was my job, the job I hated, the job I'd always been best at. I pressed the first button. 2 heavy blasts punched up from under the bridge. Not a Hollywood fireball, but the dry, splintering crack of wood turning to kindling. The central supports I'd chosen disintegrated. The bridge sagged, twisted, and with a grinding scream collapsed into the creek's black water. The armored vehicle lurched like a drunk and tipped onto its side, half submerged. It didn't roll completely, but it locked in place. The engine choked and died. Chaos exploded over their radio net. I heard shouting through a headset I'd taken earlier from the first crew, panicked, angry voices that couldn't make sense of what was happening. That was when I hit the second button. The charges on the truck's fuel tanks fired perfectly. 2 pillars of flame leapt up and lit the forest for a heartbeat. A moment later, the detonations hit, 2 blasts merging into one long, brutal roar. The trucks turned into burning torches, and Harrow's route of retreat died in fire. A broken bridge and a wall of flame. A trap. I gave them seconds to understand it, then triggered the 3rd charge beneath the armored vehicle's engine. The blast was smaller but final. The armored machine became dead metal. Hatches popped. Men spilled out. Harrow came last. He didn't panic. He absorbed the scene in one glance and roared into his radio. "All teams, hold! We're in an ambush! Establish a perimeter! Report in!" No reports came, because I was already working on one of his flanking teams, the one moving along the shoreline. 5 men advanced in a line near the water's edge, convinced the lake was a barrier, convinced nothing would come from it. I rose behind them out of the dark water like something born wrong. No splash, no sound. The rebreather made the lake my silent weapon. The last man in the line was their rear security. I went under him, grabbed his rig, and dragged him down. He didn't even have time to gasp. His body went slack in my hands in seconds. The other 4 were 10 yards ahead. They never noticed the gap. I slid onto shore with my knife. 2 men in front, 2 behind. I chose the back pair. One silent rush, and I was behind the first. Palm over mouth, blade under chin, a short, precise movement. His partner turned at the wet choke sound and saw me. His eyes had time for only a flicker of terror. I threw the knife straight into his throat. He went down, choking on blood. The 2 up front heard it and spun, but I already had the underwater rifle in my hands. On land, it thundered like any other weapon. 2 short bursts. Needle rounds punched through their vests where plates didn't cover. The shoreline team ceased to exist. It took less than a minute. Over the radio net, there was only the crackle of fire and Harrow's furious voice. "Shore team, report! West team, report! What the hell is going on?" The team approaching from the other side heard the blast and the gunfire and dropped into the woods. Their leader reported shakily, "Harrow, we're taking fire. Can't see the shooter. Shots from the lakeside." A lie. No one had fired at them. That was fear talking. They were shooting at shadows. I left them there. Let them huddle and tremble. My priority was Harrow. I slid back into the lake and swam toward the collapsed bridge. Harrow and 3 of his remaining men had taken cover behind the armored vehicle lying on its side. He shouted into his radio, trying to raise the teams. Then he fell silent. Through my optic, I watched him circle the wreck, step to the water, and stare at the oily sheen spreading across the surface. Then he lifted his head and looked straight toward me, like he could feel my eyes on him. He didn't shout again. He understood. He understood this wasn't a bunch of locals with hunting rifles. He understood the blasts, the movement, the silent removal of an entire team, the signature of a professional, his kind of professional. I saw his lips move. A word formed so quietly I read it more than heard it. Combat diver, then sea devil. He knew the stories, the whispered rumors about a northern unit, about men who came out of the water. He looked at the burning trucks, at his shaken fighters, at the hostile dark woods, and I didn't see fear. I saw the bright, furious excitement of a hunter who had finally found worthy game. "All teams fall back to Rally Point Alpha," he ordered into the radio. "Mission change. We've got the drowned man out here. We're hunting." He said my old call sign. Either Kane had warned him, or he'd put the pieces together. My lake demon sign from the first crew, and what was happening now. It changed everything. Now it was personal. He ordered a withdrawal, a regroup. He wasn't going to storm Stone Creek anymore. He was going to hunt me, and I knew he wouldn't stop until one of us ended up in the dirt. The ghost had been identified, and the hunt began. The night turned into a deadly game of cat and mouse. The surviving mercenary teams abandoned the assault plan and started moving deeper into the woods toward Harrow's rally point. There were maybe 10, 12 of them left, his best men, scared, furious, and dangerous. Harrow was smart. He knew that in darkness, in my forest, he was the prey. He needed daylight, a reset, a methodical search. I couldn't let him have that. I shadowed them, landing short, harassing strikes. I wasn't trying to kill. I was herding them, like a wolf driving a deer herd, denying rest, playing their nerves like strings. I used smoke to confuse them. I fired over their heads with the underwater rifle, its strange thunder not quite like anything they were used to, feeding the fear of the unknown. By dawn, they were exhausted. I'd driven them miles away from town, but I knew it was temporary. With sunrise, Harrow would change tactics. He'd start tracking me by my own signs, and then I'd have to fight on terms I couldn't afford. I couldn't take a dozen pros alone in daylight. I needed help. I needed my town. I returned to Stone Creek as the eastern sky began to blush in pale watercolor. The men on the observation post met me with wide eyes and clenched jaws. They'd heard the explosions, heard the gunfire, seen the orange glow licking up behind the trees, and they still hadn't abandoned their positions. "What the hell was that?" asked Roy Mercer, an old hunter whose eyes read the forest better than any night vision rig. "A warning," I said. "Now they know we'll fight. Get to Walter. Gather everyone. We don't have much time." I walked into Walter Hensley's house soaked to the bone, worn down to the wire, the rifle strapped across my back. It was the first time they'd seen me like that. Not Ethan, the quiet boat mechanic, but the man underneath. All 9 of our defenders were packed into the main room. They stared at me in silence, waiting. I didn't bother with half-truths. "My name is Ethan Sawyer," I said. 10 years ago, I served in maritime special operations. The men who hit us are being led by a professional mercenary. He knows who I am, and he won't stop until he puts me in the ground, along with anyone who stands in his way. He'll treat this town like my base, and you like my accomplices. There won't be mercy." A heavy silence settled, thick as smoke. Shock, disbelief, fear. I saw it all. But nobody looked away. Walter broke it first, slow and steady. "So that's it," he said. "Special ops. I figured you weren't just some drifter with a toolbox. Well, good. Better for us. What do we do, Commander?" The word commander hit like grit in my teeth. I hadn't been anybody's commander in 10 years. But right then, I didn't have the luxury of refusing. "They'll start sweeping the woods as soon as the sun's up," I said. "Their target is me. But they'll come through town. We turn Stone Creek into a fortress. Every window becomes a firing slit. Every house is a fighting position." I spread a rough map of the town across the table, something I'd sketched from memory. "Roy, you and your boy are the best shots we've got. You take the church loft. You can cover the whole main street from there. Hank, you and your neighbor take this corner house. It controls the road. Everyone else spread along the lakeside homes. The rules are simple. Don't silhouette yourself. Don't waste rounds. Only shoot when you're sure. And listen to me. I'll coordinate over radios." I pulled out a handful of cheap handheld radios I'd picked up in the nearest county seat. One of the men shifted uneasily. "We're not soldiers, Ethan. We've got hunting rifles. They've got assault weapons." "Our main weapon isn't your rifle," I cut in. "It's this shore, these houses, every rock you've known since you were a kid. They're strangers here. We're home. Barricade the windows. Leave narrow slits. Women and kids into cellars. Get anything that burns. Gas bottles, rags, whatever you've got. If they push into town, we answer with fire." They listened, and I watched fear harden into something darker. Grim resolve. I didn't promise victory. I promised a fighting chance. And they grabbed it with both hands. For the next few hours, the town buzzed like a kicked hornet nest. Men boarded windows, hauled sandbags, built firing points. Women cooked, stacked bandages, filled bottles for Molotovs. In that raw, furious work, they became one body, one unit. But I couldn't stay with them. I was the bait. I had to pull Harrow onto me, buy the town time, and strike when he least expected it. I went back into the woods, this time leaving a trail, not obvious to civilians but clear as a road sign to someone like Harrow. A snapped twig, pressed moss, a boot print set in mud. I led him away from Stone Creek, drawing him deeper into the swamp country where I knew every hummock and he'd be blind. By noon he bit. I heard them first, 3 teams sweeping the timber. Harrow was smart. He didn't send everyone down my trail. He put 2 of his best trackers on it and kept the rest moving on the flanks, ready to cut off my exits. The game started. I pulled them toward an old ravine choked with spruce and deadfall. At the bottom I'd planted a surprise, a simple trip line that didn't trigger a grenade, but several smoke canisters and a chain of loud firecrackers. When the trackers hit it, the ravine filled with thick smoke and a brutal crackling roar. The mercs reacted like they'd been ambushed, dumping wild automatic fire into the gray, burning through magazines for nothing. And while they shot at ghosts, I was already circling wide. I didn't fire. I only showed myself for a few seconds on the ridge, just long enough for Harrow alone to see me. Our eyes met at 200 yards. I lifted my hand, almost like a greeting. Then I vanished back into the trees. I saw his face twist with fury. He understood I was playing him, turning his hunt into humiliation. That was exactly what I wanted. A furious enemy is a stupid enemy. He threw everything after me. The siege of Stone Creek became a personal duel between him and me in the northern timber. But I knew it was still a diversion. Sooner or later, he'd realize I was pulling him away from the true target. Then he'd turn around and hit the town with everything he had. By then, they had to be ready. I kept them running through the woods until evening. Twice they nearly caught me, and I had to break contact using every trick my body still remembered. Sliding down rock faces, cutting across icy streams, disappearing through swamp water and reed beds. I was exhausted. So were they. I heard their ragged breathing, their cursing. The forest drained them. It fed me. When dusk started to thicken, I heard Harrow's voice over the radio. Short, cold, final. Enough chasing a ghost. Pull back. New objective. The town. Burn it to the ground. I'd been waiting for that. While his teams clawed their way out of the swamp, angry and tired, I had maybe an hour. I ran. I had to be there to meet them. When I burst into Stone Creek, it was unrecognizable. Streets were blocked with barricades made of boats, logs, and old furniture. House windows stared out through narrow slits like gun ports. The air smelled of fear and ozone, like a storm about to break. The town crouched low, ready for its last fight. "They're coming," I said into the radio. "All posts ready." I took my position in the attic of Walter's house, dead center of town. From there I could see most approaches and direct the defense. Beside me lay the rifle, spare magazines and 3 Molotovs wrapped tight so they wouldn't clink. The mercs appeared at the tree line just before full dark. 9 of them. 9 shadows armed to the teeth. Harrow didn't throw them into a straight charge. He moved them like knives, slow, careful, stepping from cover to cover. "Listen up," I whispered into the radio. "Lakeside team, they're yours. Roy, center team is yours. Nobody fires until I say. Not one shot." They crept closer. They expected bullets, but the town stayed silent. That silence was worse than gunfire. They came nearly within reach. The lead group was 30 yards from the lakeside houses. "Lakeside team, fire!" 3 hunting rifles cracked almost at once. The blast shredded the quiet. Buckshot slammed one merc off his feet. Another dropped with a howl. The third managed to dive behind a boulder. At the same instant, I called the second team. "Roy, work!" From the church loft, Roy's old rifle barked and his son's carbine snapped. Rounds smacked the fence where the center group was taking cover. One merc leaned out to shoot and caught a hit in the shoulder, dropping hard. Then hell opened. The mercs answered with automatic fire. Bullets chewed fences and kicked splinters out of logs, but our men stayed tucked behind cover. Harrow realized his people were being dragged into a fight on our terms. "Cover! Suppress the rooftops!" he shouted. 3 rifles in the tree line opened up, hammering my roof. I flattened to the attic floor as rounds drummed overhead. We needed to break their firing point. "Hank," I said into the radio, "you see them?" "I see them," he answered. "Clear as day." "Do it." From the corner house, flame arced high, a bottle sailing through the dark, and crashed into the brush where Harrow's shooters were set. Dry leaves and needles flashed bright. The mercs cursed and rolled back, beating at fire on their sleeves. I used the moment. I leaned to the attic vent and poured a long burst into their position. One went down and didn't get back up. Harrow and his last man pulled deeper into the woods. The fight had been going 10 minutes. We had 1 wounded. Hank took shrapnel through the arm. They were down 4, 2 dead, 2 badly hit. But they were professionals. They regrouped and came again, fiercer now, burning ammo like they had endless boxes of it. They pinned Roy's position with suppressing fire. The center team pushed into the houses. I saw 2 mercs preparing to toss a grenade into Walter's home. "Walter, get out!" I shouted into the radio. Too late. The blast blew out windows and door. I understood then. We couldn't hold them forever. They were fewer, but better armed, better trained. They would grind us down. We needed a new tactic. We needed to pull the wolf out. We needed Harrow. "Everyone fall back to the dock," I ordered. "To the water. Move!" It was desperate. It was our only chance. The men withdrew, firing as they went. The mercs, thinking we'd cracked, surged after them. They rushed into town and stepped into the last trap. When they hit the open space near the burned dock, I lit the fuse on my last bottle. But this wasn't just gasoline. I'd packed it with powder and fine shot. I didn't throw it at them. I threw it at the old shed where Hank stored diesel cans and propane cylinders. The explosion was monstrous. The shed disintegrated. A wave of fire rolled over the mercs, slamming them to the ground. The ones who lived were stunned, disoriented, half blind in the smoke. And right then we hit them from every direction, off the shore, from behind overturned boats, from between the rocks. It wasn't a firefight anymore. It was slaughter. When the smoke thinned, 3 more mercs were sprawled on the sand. The wounded moaned and crawled, but Harrow wasn't among them. I understood what he'd done. While his men drove into the town, he'd looped around through the woods and come in behind us. He wasn't hunting the town. He was hunting me. I saw his silhouette against a burning house. 30 yards away, calm as a monument, an assault rifle cradled in his hands. The battle for Stone Creek was over. Now it was a duel. Fire raged around us. Homes burned. Old pines at the edge of town snapped and screamed as they caught. The air was heavy with smoke and cordite, thick enough to chew. Somewhere, wounded men shouted. Women who'd crawled out of their cellars cried. It all blended into one long animal sound. But none of it reached me. The world narrowed to one man standing across from me. Harrow. He didn't fire. He waited. He was giving me the same courtesy I was giving him. This fight belonged to the two of us, and no one else was allowed inside it. "Drowned man," he shouted, his voice cutting through the roar of flame. "I knew you didn't die in Somalia. Guys like us don't sink." "You're wrong, Harrow," I said, shifting sideways, searching for better cover. "The man you knew sank. I'm not him anymore." "Not him?" He smiled. It looked ugly on a face smeared with soot and blistered by heat. "You're protecting these locals? You, the one who sank ships and wiped out whole security teams? Don't make me laugh. You ran and hid like a rat, but your nature caught up with you. You're a killer, drowned man. Same as me." "I'm a soldier," I said, "and you're a scavenger who came here to rob and murder old people. That's the difference." "There is no difference," he bellowed. "There's only strength and money, and tonight I'll prove my strength is more." He brought the rifle up. I dove behind a heap of burned timbers, a heartbeat before his burst shredded it into splinters. I answered back, forcing him to duck behind the corner of a house. Then we started the dance. Short sprints through rubble, bursts of gunfire, hard cover, smoke, movement, silence, movement again. He was good. Too good. Fast, accurate, reading angles like he'd built them. And I realized something that chilled me even more than the lake ever could. In a straight gunfight, we were even, which meant sooner or later, a stray round would find one of us. I needed to force my kind of fight, my rules. I stopped shooting and disappeared. He stopped too, waiting. He knew I was still there. He was trying to bait me. I began to withdraw, not deeper into town, but toward the lake, toward the only place on earth that had ever felt like it belonged to me. I crawled behind a shed, slid down the rocky slope, and reached the waterline. Harrow read it immediately. "Running your way, drowned man," he shouted. "Diving back into your favorite dark? Not happening." He burst from cover and sprinted for the shore, firing as he ran. Bullets punched little geysers around me. I went under. The icy water shocked me, then steadied me. Underwater, I was home. I kicked out a few yards and tucked behind a big submerged boulder. I shrugged off the harness and rifle. Too much drag, too much noise. I kept one weapon, my knife. Harrow stood on the bank, staring into the black water, knowing I was in there somewhere. He pulled grenades from his rig. "Come on out, you water rat!" The first grenade detonated 10 yards away. The shock wave slammed my chest and punched air out of my lungs. My ears rang like bells. The second went off closer. He was going to keep dropping them until I surfaced. So I did something he didn't expect. I broke the surface right in front of him, 5 yards off the bank. He froze for a fraction of a second, staring at my head in the water like he'd just watched the lake grow eyes. That fraction was all I needed. I threw my knife. Not at him, at his rifle. Steel clanged off the forend hard enough to knock his aim wide. He cursed and fired, but the burst went high into the smoke. And then I lunged out of the water like an animal, hit him low, and drove him backward. We went down together, rolling into the shallows. This was our last fight, knee-deep, waist-deep, in cold water and sucking mud. He was physically stronger. His blows landed like hammers. He tried to drown me, to grind my face into the bottom. I choked, water filling my mouth and throat. But I was tougher and angrier. I was fighting for my home, for the people who trusted me. He was fighting for money and pride. I twisted and drove my knee into his groin. His grip loosened. I ripped free and staggered upright. He rose too. We stood waist-deep in the lake, heaving, locked eye to eye. In his eyes there was only rage. He drew his own knife. "I'm going to gut you, Seal," he rasped. He rushed me. I slipped the first thrust. The second I beat with speed, catching his knife hand and trying to wrench it aside. We grappled like animals. His blade carved the air near my face. I felt the corded tension in his arms. The way he kept forcing ground, inch by inch, driving me back. And then I saw my knife. It was stuck in the shoreline sand, right where his rifle had fallen. One hard move. I shoved Harrow off with everything I had, dipped under, and ripped my knife free by the handle. When I came up, he was already on me again. His blade was coming straight for my chest, and I didn't have time to dodge. I raised my left arm, the knife buried deep in my forearm, down to bone. Pain flared hot and bright. But I caught him. I held his knife hand in place, and my right hand, my knife clenched tight, made one short motion, almost invisible. Forward and up, under the ribs, straight into the heart. Harrow froze. His eyes widened, not with fear, but with surprise. He looked down at the knife buried in his chest, then back up at me. The rage drained out of his face. All that remained was confusion. His mouth opened, but instead of words, blood poured out. He sagged into the water, and the lake took him, cold, quiet, and final. I stood over him, breathing hard. Blood pulsed from my arm in dark streams. The pain should have been unbearable. I barely felt it. I stared into the black water. Up through smoke, stars began to show. It was over. Silence fell on Stone Creek, the kind of silence you only hear when the shooting stops. I stepped out of the lake and dropped to my knees in the sand. I'd won, but there was no joy in it, only emptiness. When I came back to myself, Walter Hensley's face hovered over mine, creased, soot-stained, his eyes wet with relief. "Alive," he whispered. "You're alive, son." Someone, Roy's wife, I thought, worked quickly with practiced hands, cinching a tourniquet high on my arm. The pain came roaring back, sharp, pulsing, bright. The whole town stood around me. Our men, exhausted, blackened with smoke, some bleeding, all still standing. They stared down at me, and something in their eyes had shifted. It wasn't just respect. It was the kind of gratitude you feel for family, the kind you can't fake and can't forget. We'd won, but it was a bitter win. 2 houses had burned to the ground. Several more were badly damaged, and we'd lost 2 of our own. Roy Mercer and Hank Miller, 2 stubborn old hunters who'd held the line until the end. 4 more were hurt. We'd paid an awful price for our ground. The next hours blurred together. We fought fires, wrapped wounds, searched for anyone missing. We dragged the mercenaries' bodies into a single pile far from town. 18 of them, 18 dead men, and now they were our problem. The county sheriff's office wasn't going to save us. Trying to explain why a remote lakeside town suddenly had 24 heavily armed contractors on its doorstep and why half the place was scorched would be useless at best and dangerous at worst. They'd make us the villains. So we handled it differently. I made my way to the underwater grotto, pulled out the flash drive and Harrow's satellite phone. In his contacts, I found a number labeled Boss. From a clean burner, I sent a single message. Harrow and his men are down. Stone Creek is closed territory. The next one who comes ends up at the bottom of the lake. The drowned man. It was a bluff, but I needed it to land. Then I called the only man who could help us, my old commander, Marcus Kane. "Kane," I said when he picked up. "It's me. I've got a problem, a big one." I gave him the short version. He stayed silent for a long time. I could hear him breathing on the other end, slow and heavy. 20 men, he finally said. Ethan, do you have any idea what you've stepped into? Northridge Resources isn't just a company. There are people behind them at the top. I know, I said, but I didn't have a choice. I need help. We need the bodies gone. We need this buried. Wait, he said, don't touch anything else. Keep quiet. I'll figure something out. He hung up. We waited the entire day. Stone Creek sank into grief. We buried Roy and Hank in the small town cemetery. No pastor, but we gave them honor. Each man fired a final shot into the sky from his hunting rifle. They died like soldiers defending their homes. That night a helicopter came in with no markings. It set down in the clearing behind town. Men stepped out in black gear, same color, different patches, and Marcus Kane was with them. He looked older, gray threaded his hair now, but his gaze was the same, hard, clear, unbreakable. He walked straight to me and hugged me like he meant it. You're out of your mind, drowned man, he said quietly. Always have been. I was protecting my home, I said. Sir. He looked past me at the wrecked town, the fresh graves, the exhausted faces. Then it's our home too, he said. My people will clean this up. Official story will be a criminal shootout over a trafficking route. Nobody touches you. And Northridge Resources, we will handle that. You still have the drive? I nodded and handed him the little piece of plastic. Everything you need is on there. Good. He pocketed it. That's enough to keep them underground for a long time. His team worked fast, disciplined, silent. Within hours, they'd bagged and lifted the bodies, collected the weapons, scrubbed the obvious signs of the fight. By morning, there was no trace of the mercenaries, only damage and memory. Before he left, Kane pulled me aside. Listen, he said, there's a place for you back in the building. Paperwork, analysis, quiet work. You earned peace. I looked at Stone Creek, the people already clearing debris, Walter showing men how to brace a wall. Thank you, I said, but my peace is here. Kane nodded like he'd expected it. Thought so. If you need anything, call. He shook my hand and headed for the helicopter. The rotors spun up, lifting dead leaves into a storm, and the aircraft vanished into a gray northern sky. A lull. We were left with our grief, our victory, and what was left of our town. But we were together, and that was the only thing that mattered. We started rebuilding, more than houses. We rebuilt a life. A month passed. The first snow dusted Stone Creek's wounds, covering craters and burn scars in a clean white sheet. Life, stubborn as a weed in cracked pavement, pushed back. We rebuilt the burned homes. The whole town worked from dawn to dark. Where the old dock had stood, we raised a new one. Solid, thick-planked, cut from old pine. I wasn't just Ethan, the boat mechanic anymore, the quiet outsider living at the water's edge. I was part of the land now, part of the people. They'd taken me in completely. My past wasn't a secret anymore. It became a story the old folks told in low voices by the stove on long nights. A legend about a guardian spirit that lived in the lake and didn't let strangers take what wasn't theirs. Kane called sometimes. Northridge Resources was shaking. The flash drive was a match dropped into a fuel tank. Executives falling, investigations opening, arrests being made. Whatever illegal extraction scheme they tried to run up north got swallowed by bigger problems. Nothing threatened us now. I thought I'd finally found peace. I thought the past had loosened its grip. Then one day in mid-November, when the lake started to skin over with its first thin crust of ice, a vehicle appeared on the road. Not a black SUV, just an ordinary pickup. It stopped in front of my house. A woman stepped out, early 30s, short hair, tired but sharp gray eyes. She wore an old sweater under a heavy jacket, the kind you choose for real cold. "Are you Ethan Sawyer?" she asked. Her voice was calm, steady. "Yes," I said, studying her. "My name is Claire Dawson," she said. "I'm a journalist." I tensed. We didn't need journalists. "We're not giving interviews," I said flatly. "I'm not here for an interview." She shook her head. "Not about Northridge anyway. I came for something personal. My brother served with you. His name was Ryan Dawson. Call sign, Skate." The world tilted. Skate. Ryan. Our comms guy, a loud, funny kid from Chicago who went down early on that cursed ship. I couldn't find my voice. I've been looking for you for 10 years, she said. Everyone said you were dead. I never believed it. My brother wasn't the kind of man who just drowns during training. I followed my own trail. It led me to Northridge, then to a federal contact who told me quietly to look for a good boat mechanic in the north, to look for you. Kane. He'd done this. He'd decided I needed it. Maybe that she did too. Why did you come? I asked, my throat raw. I wanted the truth about how he died, she said, and I wanted to look the man in the eyes who was with him in his last minutes. We talked for hours. I told her everything. The operation, the betrayal, the firefight, and how Ryan kept trying to push out an SOS until a sniper's round cut him off. As I spoke, the weight I'd carried for 10 years shifted. For the first time, I put that pain into someone's hands who had a right to hold it. She listened without interrupting. Tears ran down her cheeks. But they weren't loud, hysterical tears. They were quiet, clear. Thank you, she whispered when I finished. Now I know. He died a hero. She stayed in town a few days, walked the shoreline, talked to the elders, helped the women, watched me. There was no pity in her gaze, no awe, only understanding. She knew loss the way I did. On the third day before she left, we stood on the new dock and looked out at the lake as it tightened toward winter. What will you do now? She asked. Live, I said. Fix boats, fish, help people. You won't go back? No. I shook my head. My war is over. I found my home. She nodded. I could come again, she said, just to talk. Come, I told her. There's always hot coffee and fresh fish here. She drove away, but I knew she'd be back. Her arrival hadn't been the past breaking in. It had been a bridge between who I'd been and who I'd become. The past didn't disappear. It became part of me. But it stopped being a curse. It became strength. I looked out across the lake. Soon it would vanish under ice, sleeping until spring, like I once tried to. But spring always comes. For the lake. For me. A long, brutal northern winter waited ahead. For the first time in 10 years, it didn't scare me, because I wasn't alone. I had Stone Creek, my home,